Hashtag Part 1. Is $100 enough to make you disappear? Claire Harrington's voice was soft. That somehow made it worse. The champagne glasses stopped clinking near the edge of the ballroom. A few executives turned their heads. Someone near the marble staircase laughed under his breath, already sensing entertainment. Ethan Walker stood beneath the warm gold light of the Harrington Grand Hotel ballroom, one hand still resting beside the tray he had caught before it crashed into a young server. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo, just a clean white shirt, dark work pants, and an old brown jacket that looked painfully ordinary among $5,000 suits. Claire looked him over once. Shoes, jacket, calloused hands. Then she reached into her purse. Here. A crisp $100 bill landed on the table between them. Not handed, thrown. The corner of it slid beneath a champagne glass. Take it, Claire said. And next time, let my staff handle their own mistakes. The young waitress Ethan had defended went pale. Ms. Harrington, it was my fault. Enough. He was only helping me. I said enough. 3 quick sentences. 3 doors slammed shut. Then silence. Ethan looked at the $100 bill. He didn't touch it. Around them, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and polished silver. A string quartet continued playing near the far wall, though the violinist had begun watching from the corner of his eye. Ethan could smell expensive perfume, roasted coffee, and the faint citrus polish on the marble floor. Behind him stood his 9-year-old daughter, Sophie. She had seen everything. That mattered more than the money. Daddy. Ethan turned. Her small fingers tightened around the sleeve of his jacket. Did she think you needed that? A few people smiled. Not kindly. Claire folded her arms. Well, Ethan finally reached for the bill. The room leaned toward him. He smoothed it once between his fingers. Then he slid it quietly back across the table. Claire's smile disappeared. Keep it, Ethan said. Her eyes narrowed. You're refusing $100? I'm refusing what came with it. The laughter died. Claire stepped closer. You have no idea who you're talking to. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. There was no anger in his face. No embarrassment. Only something steady. Something almost familiar to men who had spent their lives around real authority. I know exactly who I'm talking to, he said. Claire's jaw tightened. And who is that? Ethan glanced at Sophie. Then back at Claire. A woman who thinks price and value are the same thing. Nobody laughed now. Claire stared at him. For the first time that evening, she had no immediate answer. Ethan took Sophie's hand. They walked away beneath 100 silent eyes. But near the ballroom entrance, an older man in a charcoal suit froze when he saw Ethan's name printed on the visitor badge clipped beneath his jacket. Ethan Walker. The man's face drained of color. Because he knew that name. And somewhere inside Harrington Capital, locked behind lawyers, patents, and a billion-dollar acquisition, there was a document that could not move forward without one signature. His. $100 had just been thrown at the only man who could decide whether Claire Harrington's biggest deal lived or died. Sophie did not ask another question until they were outside. The hotel doors closed behind them with a soft hiss, shutting out the music, the chandeliers, and the kind of laughter that stayed with a person longer than it should. Cold evening air moved across the sidewalk. Ethan buttoned his old jacket and looked down at his daughter. She was still holding his hand, but not swinging it the way she usually did. Daddy, were you embarrassed? Ethan stopped beside the curb. A black luxury sedan rolled past them, its windows dark enough to hide whoever sat inside. A little, he said. Sophie looked surprised. But you did not look embarrassed. Ethan smiled. That is different. She thought about that. Why did you give the money back? Because money can help when you need groceries, gas, or medicine. He crouched until they were eye level. But you should never let someone use it to tell you what you are worth. Sophie glanced back at the glowing hotel windows. She thinks she is better than you. Maybe. Are you better than her? Ethan shook his head. That is not the lesson. He stood, and together they crossed the parking lot toward a faded blue Ford pickup that looked almost invisible between polished sports cars and imported sedans. The heater took 2 tries to start. The dashboard clock was 7 minutes slow. Sophie climbed into the passenger seat and pulled her coat around herself while Ethan turned the key. Nothing about the truck suggested secrets. Nothing about the man behind the wheel suggested that one of the most expensive business negotiations in the state had quietly begun to circle his name. 20 minutes later, the city lights had thinned into neighborhood streets lined with modest houses and bare trees. Ethan pulled into the driveway of a small two-bedroom home with peeling white paint near the garage trim. Inside, the air smelled like tomato soup and laundry detergent. Sophie dropped her backpack near the kitchen table. Ethan hung his jacket on the same wooden hook he had used for 6 years. On the refrigerator were school drawings, a grocery list, and one photograph held up by a blue magnet. Ethan, younger. Sophie is a toddler. And a woman with auburn hair smiling between them. Rachel. Ethan looked at the photograph only for a second before turning toward the stove. Homework first. Sophie groaned. That is unfair. Life is full of injustice. You sound like a grandpa. I am 40. Exactly. He laughed, and for a few minutes, the ballroom disappeared. Across town, Claire Harrington was not laughing. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, 38 stories above the street, while her chief legal officer placed a folder on the desk behind her. We found him, Daniel Mercer said. Claire did not turn. Found who? Daniel hesitated. The man from tonight. Claire finally looked over her shoulder. Why would I care? Because his name is Ethan Walker. Something in Daniel's voice made her face change. He opened the folder. Patent filings. Engineering diagrams. Corporate records more than a decade old. At the top of the first page were 2 names. Rachel Walker. Ethan Walker. Claire walked closer. This cannot be the same man. It is. The maintenance worker? He is not a maintenance worker in any way that matters to us. Daniel slid another document toward her. 9 years ago, Walker and his wife designed the thermal management architecture inside the battery platform we are trying to acquire. Claire stared at the signature. I thought Northstar Energy owned everything. They own almost everything. Daniel tapped one line. Except the final licensing authority on the original core patent. Claire read the name again. Ethan Walker. Her expression hardened. How much is the acquisition worth? If approved, projected value is around $1.8 billion. The room became very quiet. Daniel closed the folder halfway. And without Walker's signature, we do not control the patent. Claire said nothing. For the first time since the gala, she remembered the $100 bill sliding back across the table. She remembered his voice. Price and value are not the same thing. Then Daniel placed one final sheet in front of her. There is more. Claire looked down. What? Walker has refused every offer made to him for 6 years. Claire did not sleep well that night. By 6 in the morning, the city below her penthouse was still gray, but the folder Daniel had left on her desk was already open beside a cup of untouched coffee. Ethan Walker had been more than a name on an old patent. He had been a systems engineer at Northstar Energy, one of the youngest people ever promoted into its advanced battery division. Rachel Walker had worked beside him. Together, they had designed a thermal control system that could keep high-capacity batteries stable under extreme heat without sacrificing efficiency. The reports called it elegant. Investors called it valuable. Ethan had called it Rachel's best idea. Then she died. 2 years after Sophie was born, Rachel became ill, and within months the future Ethan had planned disappeared. He resigned before Northstar could offer him a leadership position. He sold his shares, paid medical debts, moved into a smaller house, and vanished from the business world. But he never surrendered his licensing authority. Claire turned another page. There were offers. $2 million. $4 million. $7 million. Each one marked declined. Why? She whispered. Across town, Ethan was packing Sophie's lunch into a paper bag. Peanut butter or turkey? Turkey. You said peanut butter yesterday. Yesterday Sophie was a different person. Ethan nodded solemnly. I respect her growth. She smiled, then noticed an old photograph resting near his toolbox. Rachel stood beside a prototype battery module, safety glasses pushed into her hair, laughing at something beyond the frame. You miss Mom today? Sophie asked. Ethan paused. Every day. More today. He looked at the photograph. Maybe a little. Sophie leaned against him for a moment. Ethan kissed the top of her head, then closed the lunch bag. There was no grand speech. Grief had lived in their house too long to need one. At 7:30, Ethan dropped Sophie at school and drove toward the maintenance facility where he worked repairing industrial equipment. He liked machines because they did not care about titles. A worn bearing sounded worn whether the person listening was rich or poor. By 9:15, his supervisor approached carrying an envelope. Corporate courier brought this. Ethan wiped his hands on a shop towel. For me. Unless we hired another Ethan Walker overnight. Inside was a formal meeting request from Harrington Capital. No apology, no explanation, just a time, an address, and the words regarding North Star Licensing Authority. Ethan folded the paper once. His supervisor studied him. You in trouble? No. You look like a man who just got called to the principal. Ethan almost smiled. Something like that. 20 miles away, Claire entered a conference room where 12 senior executives were already waiting. Daniel stood beside a screen showing acquisition projections. Without Walker, the closing cannot proceed, he said. One board member frowned, then increased the offer. We already know he has rejected $7 million. Another executive shrugged. Everyone has a number. Claire stared at the empty chair at the far end of the table. For some reason, she remembered Ethan standing beside his daughter beneath the hotel lights, refusing to let humiliation become anger. What if he does not? She asked. The room quieted. Daniel looked at her carefully. Then we may have spent 18 months negotiating a deal one man can stop with a single word. Claire's eyes returned to the empty chair. For the first time in years, money was not the part of the negotiation she trusted most. The invitation from Harrington Capital remained folded in Ethan's jacket pocket until the next morning. He did not stare at it. He did not call anyone. He made pancakes for Sophie, packed her lunch, reminded her to bring her science worksheet, and drove her to school beneath a pale blue sky that looked almost too peaceful for what waited downtown. Are you going to the rich ladies' building? Sophie asked as he pulled up beside the curb. Ethan looked at her. How did you know? You make pancakes when you are thinking too much. He smiled despite himself. I will be there for a meeting. Are you scared? A little. But you will not look scared. Ethan nodded. You are learning. Sophie reached for the door, then stopped. Remember what you told me. Which part? Do not let someone else decide what you are worth. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he gave her a quiet smile. Have a good day, kiddo. 40 minutes later, his old Ford rolled into the underground garage beneath Harrington Capital headquarters. Glass, steel, polished stone. Everything about the building seemed designed to remind visitors how much money had passed through it. Ethan stepped into the lobby wearing the same brown jacket Claire had seen at the gala. The receptionist looked at his work boots, then at the tablet in front of her. Delivery entrance is around back, sir. Ethan remained calm. I have a 10 o'clock meeting. With whom? Daniel Mercer. Her expression changed. She checked the screen again. Ethan Walker? Yes. She stood straighter. Please take the private elevator to the 38th floor. Ethan thanked her as if nothing unusual had happened. Upstairs, 12 executives waited around a walnut conference table long enough to seat 20. Coffee steamed from white porcelain cups. Legal folders sat in perfect rows. Claire stood near the windows, speaking quietly with Daniel when the doors opened. One board member glanced toward Ethan and frowned. Facilities can come back later. Daniel did not answer. Ethan stepped inside. Another executive looked annoyed. We are in the middle of a confidential acquisition meeting. I know, Ethan said. Claire turned. The color left her face so subtly that only Daniel noticed. She stared at the old jacket first, then the man wearing it. You. Ethan gave a small nod. Good morning, Ms. Harrington. Nobody understood the silence between them. Not yet. Daniel cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ethan Walker. The room shifted. A chair stopped moving. A pen clicked once and went still. Daniel continued. Mr. Walker is the surviving co-inventor and final licensing authority for the Walker thermal management patent. One executive blinked. This is Walker? Another leaned toward the documents in front of him as if the pages might correct what his eyes were seeing. Claire said nothing. Ethan walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table and sat down. He placed no briefcase beside him. No attorney. No assistant. Just a small worn notebook and a black pen. Daniel opened the presentation. Mr. Walker, thank you for coming. Harrington Capital has spent 18 months preparing the North Star acquisition. Your patent is central to the transaction. Ethan looked at the first projection on the screen. I know. Then you understand the urgency. I understand urgency. Claire finally spoke. And you understand what is being offered. Ethan turned toward her. Their eyes met across the length of the table. Not yet. One board member pushed a folder forward. $7 million was apparently not enough in the past. We are prepared to improve that significantly. Ethan did not reach for the folder. Instead, he looked at the workforce report lying beside it. 312 positions marked for consolidation. His expression changed, not with surprise, but recognition. What happens to these people? He asked. The executive hesitated. That is a separate matter. Ethan closed the folder without opening it. No, he said quietly. It is the same matter. Claire watched him, and for the first time she realized the man sitting across from her had not come to negotiate the price of his signature. He had come to decide what that signature was allowed to cost everyone else. No one answered Ethan's question right away. The conference room had been built for confident people, the kind who could discuss hundreds of millions of dollars without raising their voices. But 312 jobs had somehow made the room uncomfortable. Daniel Mercer looked down at the workforce report. Claire remained still near the windows. One of the board members, Thomas Bell, finally cleared his throat. Mr. Walker, restructuring is standard in acquisitions of this size. Ethan looked at him. Standard for who? Thomas frowned. For the company. That was not my question. A chair creaked softly. Claire watched Ethan without speaking. He did not sound angry. That made his words harder to dismiss. Thomas leaned back. Some positions overlap. Some departments become unnecessary. That is business. Ethan opened the workforce report again. 312 names. Positions, Thomas corrected. Ethan lifted his eyes. People. The room went quiet. He turned another page. Machine operators. Lab technicians. Maintenance crews. Quality control. Shipping. His finger stopped halfway down the list. 47 of these employees were part of the original North Star production team. Daniel looked surprised. You know them? I knew some of them. Ethan paused. Rachel knew more. Claire's expression softened at the name. Ethan noticed, but he did not explain. Instead, he closed the report and rested both hands on the table. When Rachel and I built the first working thermal system, it failed 6 times. Thomas gave a faint shrug. That was more than a decade ago. Yes. Ethan looked toward him, and each time it failed, those people stayed after their shifts to help us figure out why. A machinist named Harold Green redesigned a bracket we could not stabilize. A technician named Maria Lopez caught a sensor error that would have ruined 3 months of testing. A maintenance supervisor named Calvin Reed kept the lab running through a winter when the heating system barely worked. No one interrupted him now. Their names were never on the patent. Ethan continued. Their pictures were never in the investor presentation. But the technology you are trying to buy exists because people like them kept showing up. Claire slowly took a seat. You read the entire restructuring plan? She asked. Last night. Before coming here? Yes. Thomas exhaled impatiently. This is emotional history. We are discussing a commercial transaction. Ethan turned toward him. Then let us discuss numbers. He pulled his worn notebook closer. Your projections assume a 22% reduction in operating costs during the first 18 months. Most of that comes from labor consolidation. Daniel glanced toward the screen. Ethan continued. But the model also assumes no production delays during the transition, no additional retraining expense, and no loss of specialized staff. Daniel's eyes narrowed. How did you know that? Because the assumptions are printed on page 84 of your acquisition summary. Thomas shifted in his chair. Ethan opened his notebook. If even 8% of experienced technicians leave voluntarily after the layoffs begin, your estimated savings disappear before the 2nd year. Claire leaned forward. You calculated that? Last night. By yourself. Ethan gave her a brief look. The math was not difficult. For the first time, something almost like embarrassment crossed Claire's face. She remembered the man she had mistaken for someone who should be grateful for $100. Daniel picked up the acquisition summary and flipped rapidly through the pages. He is right, he said quietly. Thomas looked at him. About what? The retention sensitivity was never modeled below 95%. Another executive reached for a calculator. Then another. The room that had once dismissed Ethan's jacket was now studying his notebook. Claire watched him turn a page covered in neat handwriting, numbers, and margins filled with small corrections. Why did you leave this world? She asked. Ethan's hand stopped. The question changed the room. He looked down at the notebook for several seconds. Because after Rachel died, every meeting sounded like one more place she should have been sitting. No one moved. Ethan closed the notebook. I did not leave because I stopped understanding the work. I left because I needed to remember how to be Sophie's father. Claire lowered her eyes. Something inside her certainty had begun to crack. Not because Ethan had proven he was smarter than anyone expected, but because he had never needed them to know it. Claire did not answer right away. Ethan's words about Sophie had changed something in the room that spreadsheets could not measure. Daniel closed the acquisition summary and looked toward Claire, waiting. Thomas Bell was less patient. "We are drifting," he said. "Mr. Walker, we respect your history with the technology, but we need a decision." Ethan looked at him. "Then make me an offer that understands what is actually being decided." Thomas leaned back. "We already have." He nodded toward Daniel. Daniel hesitated, then opened a slim black folder. "Harrington Capital is prepared to offer $10 million for your remaining licensing authority, payable at closing." The room became still. $10 million. Enough to erase every mortgage payment Ethan had ever made. Enough to put Sophie through any college in the country. Enough to turn his old Ford, his modest house, and every careful grocery list into memories. Claire watched his face for the reaction she expected. Surprise. Relief. Maybe even gratitude. Ethan gave her none of them. He looked at the figure once, then at the workforce report beside it. "And the layoffs?" Thomas answered quickly. "Separate issue." Ethan's eyes remained on him. "No, Mr. Walker, $10 million is an extraordinary offer. For the patent. For your signature." Ethan nodded slowly. "Exactly." Claire folded her hands on the table. "What would make you sign?" Ethan turned toward her. "Do you want the answer that gets this deal done, or the answer your board wants to hear?" Thomas shifted. Claire did not. "The truth." Ethan opened his notebook again. "Keep the 312 positions for a minimum of 24 months. Thomas immediately shook his head. "Impossible." Ethan continued as if he had not spoken. "Create a retention program for specialized technicians. Fund retraining instead of eliminating overlapping roles. And establish an engineering scholarship for children of hourly North Star employees." Daniel looked up. "How large a scholarship fund?" Ethan paused. $5 million. Thomas stared at him. "You are asking us to spend $5 million after offering you $10 million? Ethan looked at the folder in front of him. "I am asking you to decide whether you want the technology or just the cheapest way to own it." Claire's eyes stayed on him. "And what do you want personally?" That question slowed him. Ethan glanced toward the windows. Far below, traffic moved through the city in small, silent lines. "Personally," he said, "I want to pick Sophie up from school on time." No one smiled. He looked back at Claire. "I want the people who helped build this work to still have jobs when your press release calls the acquisition a success." Thomas exhaled sharply. "This is not charity." Ethan's voice remained calm. "Neither is loyalty." The words landed harder than anger would have. Daniel lowered his eyes to the numbers. Claire studied Ethan for several seconds, then asked, "If we agree to those terms, you sign?" Ethan closed the notebook. "If the protections are real, enforceable, and written into the acquisition documents." Thomas turned toward Claire. "We cannot let one man rewrite the economics of the deal." Claire looked at him, then at the $10 million offer sitting between them. For the first time, she seemed to understand that the largest number in the room was not controlling the conversation. "Give us 10 minutes, she said. Ethan stood. "Take 20. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Claire called after him. "Mr. Walker." He turned. She glanced at the black folder. "You have not even opened the offer." Ethan looked at it, then back at her. "I know what $10 million looks like." He paused. "I am still deciding what it costs." Ethan waited in the hallway beside a wall of glass that overlooked downtown. 38 floors below, cars moved through the streets like pieces on a board, each one carrying somebody toward work, school, a hospital, a mortgage payment, a life that could be changed by a decision made in a room like this. He checked the time. Sophie would be out of school in 3 hours. Inside the conference room, voices rose and fell behind the closed door. Thomas Bell wanted the layoffs preserved. Daniel Mercer wanted the deal protected. 2 board members argued that Ethan's conditions would set a dangerous precedent. Claire listened longer than anyone expected. 312 jobs, she finally said. Thomas shook his head. 312 cost centers. Claire looked at him. That is exactly the problem. The room went still. Daniel watched her carefully. "We can restructure the savings elsewhere," he said. "Not all of them, but enough." Thomas turned toward him. "You are supporting this?" "I am supporting an acquisition that survives its own closing." Claire looked down at the workforce report. Then she remembered Sophie's small hand gripping Ethan's sleeve at the gala. She remembered the $100 bill. The casual certainty with which she had decided who Ethan was before learning anything about him. "Draft the protections," she said. Thomas stared at her. "Claire, 24 months. Retraining language. Retention incentives. $5 million scholarship fund. That cost us millions." Claire closed the report. "So does arrogance." 27 minutes after Ethan stepped into the hallway, Daniel opened the door. "Mr. Walker." Ethan returned to the conference room. A new set of papers waited at his seat. Claire remained seated this time. No performance. No polished smile. "We accepted the employment protections," she said. Ethan read the first page, then the second. He did not rush. Thomas watched the clock. Claire watched Ethan. Daniel watched both of them. After several minutes, Ethan looked up. The scholarship. Daniel slid an additional document forward. $5 million, administered independently. Children of hourly Northstar employees receive priority. Ethan read it carefully. "Rachel Walker Engineering Scholarship," Claire said. His fingers stopped on the page. For the first time that morning, the calm in his face gave way to something deeper. Not weakness. Memory. "You did not have to name it after her." Claire answered quietly. "No, we did not." Ethan nodded once. Daniel then placed the black folder in front of him. "The personal offer remains unchanged." Ethan opened it at last. A check rested inside. $10 million. Every eye in the room seemed to find it at the same time. Thomas leaned forward slightly. "You have what you asked for. Sign the licensing agreement, take the money, and we can all move on." Ethan lifted the check. He studied it for one long second. Then another. Claire could almost see the life it could buy him. A better house. Financial security. College for Sophie. Freedom from counting bills at the kitchen table. She expected him to place it beside his notebook. Instead, Ethan stood. He walked slowly along the table until he reached Claire's side. Nobody spoke. He set the check on the polished wood between them. Claire looked up at him. Ethan placed 2 fingers on the edge of the paper and pushed it gently toward her. The sound was almost nothing, just paper sliding across wood. But everyone heard it. Claire stared at the amount. Then at Ethan. "What are you doing?" He held her gaze. The other night, it was $100. Her face changed. Nobody else understood yet. Ethan continued. "Today it is 10 million. Thomas frowned. "Mr. Walker, this is absurd." Ethan never looked away from Claire. "You still think everything has a price." Claire's voice came out softer than before. "And you do not." Ethan shook his head. "Not the things that matter." Silence filled the room so completely that the ventilation system seemed suddenly loud. Claire looked down at the check she had expected to solve everything. Then she understood what Ethan had been showing her from the beginning. He had never been proving that he was worth more money. He had been proving that money was never the measure. Claire kept her eyes on the check for several seconds. No one in the room moved. Thomas Bell looked irritated. Daniel Mercer looked curious. Ethan simply stood there, calm as ever, as if $10 million were no heavier than the $100 bill she had once thrown at him. Claire finally lifted her gaze. "Then what do you want?" Ethan looked around the table. "I already told you." Thomas leaned forward. "You cannot seriously expect us to believe you are walking away from $10 million for a scholarship and some employment protections." Ethan turned toward him. "I am not walking away from $10 million. Thomas frowned. "You just pushed it back. Because I do not want to be paid for doing what I should have protected years ago." The words changed the room again. Daniel closed his pen. Claire listened. Ethan returned to his seat. "When Rachel and I signed the original licensing agreement, we were young. We thought if the technology succeeded, everyone who helped build it would succeed with us." He looked down at his notebook. "We were wrong." Claire said nothing. "After Rachel got sick, I stopped paying attention to what Northstar became. I cared about hospital appointments, insurance forms, Sophie learning how to sleep without hearing her mother in the next room." His voice remained steady, but softer now. "By the time I understood what had changed, I had already left." Thomas crossed his arms. "That still does not explain refusing the money." Ethan looked at him. "It explains exactly that." He slid the workforce protections closer. "Make these permanent enough to matter." Daniel spoke carefully. 24 months is already unusually strong. Then make the retraining program permanent. Create an employee advisory board. Give hourly workers a voice when automation changes their jobs. Thomas exhaled. "This is becoming governance reform." Ethan nodded. "Good." Claire almost smiled, but stopped herself. "Anything else?" Ethan looked at her. Yes. The room waited. Publish the scholarship publicly. Not as charity. Not as a publicity campaign about Harrington Capital saving workers. Say who built the technology. Name the technicians. Name the maintenance crews. Name the people whose hands never appeared in the patent filings. Daniel glanced at Claire. She understood immediately what it would mean. Credit. Not money. Respect. Claire looked toward the window for a moment, then back at Ethan. We can do that. Thomas turned sharply. Claire. She did not look at him. We should have done it already. Ethan studied her face as if measuring whether the answer was real. And the 10 million? Claire asked. Keep it. Thomas gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You are making a mistake. Ethan looked at him. Maybe. He folded his hands. But it will be mine. Claire's expression changed at that. For the first time, she understood the dignity in refusing to let fear make every decision. Daniel picked up the check and slipped it back into the folder. Then how do we compensate you for the license? Ethan thought for a moment. $1. Thomas stared at him. What? $1. Legal consideration. Put the rest where it can do some good. Claire looked at Ethan for a long time. You would license a patent worth millions for $1? If the protections stay in place. Why? Ethan glanced toward the name Rachel Walker printed at the top of the scholarship document. Because she would have cared more about what happened to those families than what happened to my bank account. Silence settled over the table, but it no longer felt tense. It felt respectful. Claire reached for the agreement. Daniel, revise it. Daniel nodded. Thomas said nothing. Ethan checked the time and stood. I need to leave in 15 minutes. Claire looked surprised. Why? Sophie gets out of school. For the first time that morning, Claire smiled without calculation. Of course she does. Ethan gathered his notebook. As he turned toward the door, Claire called after him. Mr. Walker. He looked back. Her voice was quieter now. I owe you an apology. Ethan waited. Claire glanced at the folder, then at him. Not for misunderstanding your patent. For misunderstanding you. Ethan considered that for a moment. Then do better with the next person. Claire nodded. There was no grand forgiveness. No sudden friendship. Just a small act of grace between two people who finally understood that respect was not something money could purchase after the damage was done. It had to begin before anyone knew what the other person was worth. 3 months later, Ethan stood beneath the same kind of fluorescent lights he had once worked under before dawn, but the room around him felt different now. Northstar Energy had kept every one of the 312 positions marked for elimination. The retraining program was already underway. Technicians who had feared being replaced were learning new systems instead. The scholarship fund had opened that morning, and the first application had come from the daughter of a machinist Ethan remembered from years ago. Harold Green. Ethan read the name twice before quietly setting the letter down. Sophie sat beside him at the kitchen table, eating cereal and watching his face. Good news? She asked. Very good news. Better than $10 million? Ethan smiled. Much better. Sophie considered that seriously. That is a lot of cereal. Ethan laughed. Life had not transformed overnight. He still drove the old Ford. He still packed lunches. He still checked grocery prices and repaired things before replacing them. But something had changed. Not in what he owned. In what he had finally made peace with. Rachel's work was no longer buried inside legal documents and corporate valuations. Her name now stood above a scholarship program that would send children of hourly workers to engineering schools across the country. Claire kept her word. More than that, she changed the way Harrington Capital handled acquisitions. Employee transition plans were reviewed before layoffs were approved. Technical teams were credited publicly. Executives were required to spend time inside the facilities they planned to restructure. Some people called it inefficient. Claire called it necessary. One Friday afternoon, she arrived at Ethan's house without a driver, without an assistant, and without the polished armor of the boardroom. She carried a small paper bag from a bakery downtown. Sophie opened the door. You are the $100 lady. Claire froze. Ethan, standing behind Sophie, covered a smile with his hand. Sophie. What? She is. Claire looked at the girl, then nodded. I was. Sophie studied her. Are you still? Claire glanced toward Ethan. I am trying not to be. Sophie seemed satisfied. Okay, you can come in. Claire stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee, cinnamon, and something baking in the oven. Rachel's photograph still hung on the refrigerator. Claire noticed it, but said nothing. Ethan poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. For a while, they talked about ordinary things. Sophie's science project, the scholarship program, the old Ford making a strange noise again. No negotiations, no numbers, no one proving anything. Weeks became months. Claire came by more often, sometimes for dinner, sometimes to help Sophie with homework, sometimes for no reason she could explain without making it sound more complicated than it was. Ethan never rushed her. He had learned that second chances were not dramatic things. They were quiet, repeated, earned. One spring evening, the three of them attended the first Rachel Walker Engineering Scholarship ceremony. The auditorium was filled with workers and their families. Harold Green sat in the front row beside his daughter, crying openly when her name was called. Claire stood near the back until Ethan found her. "You should be up front," he said. She shook her head. "This is not about me." Ethan looked toward the stage. "You learned." Claire smiled. Slowly, Sophie slipped her hand into Ethan's, then reached for Claire's with the other. For a moment, none of them spoke. They did not need to. Around them, applause filled the room, warm and steady. Ethan looked at the families, the workers, the children holding scholarship certificates, and understood something Rachel had always believed. A person's value was never measured by the number on a check, the title on a door, or the clothes someone wore into a room. Dignity was quieter than that. Grace was quieter than that. And sometimes the strongest answer to humiliation was not revenge, but refusing to become the kind of person who needed someone else to feel small. Claire squeezed Sophie's hand. Ethan looked at her. No billion-dollar deal stood between them now. No insult. No price. Just respect, slowly becoming trust, and trust becoming something that felt like a second chance. For once, the silence between them did not need to prove anything.